All right, welcome to the Wednesday, March 15th, 2023 electronic meeting of the Ann Arbor Transportation Commission. This meeting is being held electronically, but we intend to conduct this meeting similarly to an in-person meeting. Public comment will be via telephone or Zoom only. To speak during any of the public comment opportunities, please call 206-337-9723 and enter meeting ID number 934-6385-2907 or join via the Zoom link. This information is also available on the published agenda in the public notices section of the city website and on the broadcast of this meeting on CTN channel 19. All right, so I will now ask Chris to please call roll.
Okay, I will now call roll. I've received regrets from Commissioner Margolis and Commissioner Lee, who will not be able to attend. Please stay here and from where you're dialing in when your name is called. Commissioner Boland.
Here, Ann Arbor.
Commissioner Ackman.
Here, Ann Arbor.
Commissioner Brovin.
Here from Ann Arbor.
Commissioner Automaki.
Here from Ann Arbor.
Commissioner Hook.
Here from Ann Arbor.
Commissioner Keeler.
Here from Ann Arbor.
Commissioner Kleiman.
Here from Ann Arbor.
Commissioner Lee is absent. Commissioner Grosjean.
Here from Ann Arbor.
Commissioner Weinkauf.
And Suzette is actually in the attendee waiting room. I think she'll be coming over in just a second. I'm trying to promote her.
Okay. Commissioner Hess.
Here from Ann Arbor.
Commissioner Hutchinson.
Here from Ann Arbor.
Commissioner Margolis, Lieutenant McSherba, and Commissioner Stupka are absent.
Also, Suzette Weinkauf here from Ann Arbor. I was an attendee by mistake. Thank you.
Okay, we are good to go.
Okay, we have a quorum, but real quickly before the consent agenda, I just want to say thank you to this commission for allowing me to chair the meeting. And but in particular, I want to thank Molly for her 3 years of being a spectacular chair and getting this commission headed in a wonderful direction. Not just the direction, but the amount of progress that we've made has been really impressive. And I think I feel this way. I think we all owe Molly a big debt of gratitude for what she's done on this commission. So everyone, please thank Molly. I direct you to. No, I will try my best to continue in her footsteps. But I'm just glad that Molly is staying on the commission. She's not going anywhere, I don't think. And so hopefully not being chair will free her up to be even more active. So anyway, thank you, Molly. Moving on to approval of the consent agenda. There are 2 items on the consent agenda: approval of the agenda and approval of the minutes. Are there any modifications to the consent agenda? Okay, seeing none, if there's a motion to approve the consent agenda as presented. All right, Dharma, and seconded by Megan. So all those in favor of the motion, please raise their hands or say unmute and say yes. Okay.
Yeah.
All those opposed, please say no. All right, consent agenda is approved. All right, now we move on to the public comment portion. This is an opportunity for persons to speak for up to 3 minutes. Again, please call 206-337-9723 and enter meeting ID 934-6385-2907 or connect via Zoom as described on the agenda. City staff will select callers that have raised their hands one by one using the last 3 digits of your phone number or by the person's Zoom ID. In order to electronically raise your hand to indicate your desire to speak, please press *9 on your phone or select the raise hand button in Zoom. You will hear an automated announcement that the host is allowing you to speak. When speaking, please move to a quiet area and mute any television or background sounds so that we may hear you clearly. Please state your name at the beginning of your comments. Raymond? Yeah, and we'll have a timer, 3-minute timer going, I think, right? Do you want me to do that or?
Yeah, yes, I can take care of that.
Okay.
Very good. Yes, we do have our first speaker with their hand raised. Rita Ross, I've given you the floor. The floor is yours.
Thank you. I represent the 174 property owners of Earhart Village Homes as its president. As you know, we oppose the Earhart Road project. Although Earhart Village owners have participated in all of the community meetings and suggested other design scenarios, the city has been somewhat dismissive. We want to know how you could accept a design that diminishes the level of service as reported in a memo dated February 15th, 2019 from Grace Crow and Cynthia Redinger to Nick Hutchinson. Where is the data to justify spending taxpayer money on projects that reduce the level of service? Also, the city's Uniform Development Code stipulates that proposals contributing to a level of service of D, E, or F can be denied by City Council. So why should the same stipulation not apply to existing roads when implementing road diets? We believe there is room to consider more than one design. For example, the Getty's Road Improvement Project. The city collaborated with private property owners and made adjustments which resulted in a shared use path and bike lane. Since Earhart Road currently has 4 lanes and the proposal reduces the road to 2 lanes, there is sufficient room for other designs. As proposed, the city will paint chevron lines over excess road surface. Let's use that excess road surface. Move the driving lane next to the median and use the excess road for a bike lane and a walking path or a larger shared path. Constructing a sidewalk outside of the existing road will increase the overall width of the corridor, which will negatively impact the goal of reducing auto speeds. Keeping intact the existing property line and mature trees creates a narrow road visual, a known factor in reducing auto speeds. If you construct a sidewalk as proposed, significant gaps will continue into perpetuity. The Route 3 bus stop at the corner of Earhart and Getty Roads is located just west of Earhart Road, so many using that stop would have used the existing western sidewalk. All the schools, churches, and other tributary streets to King Elementary are on or connect to the western sidewalk. All residents living on the eastern side must cross Earhart Road at some point to reach those destinations. They will use the closest crosswalk to get on the west side of the street as soon as possible. We believe the goal should be reducing overall road speed and on creating adequate and properly designed crosswalks
30 seconds.
rather than filling gaps that will remain into perpetuity. Thank you.
Thank you. Do we have another hand raised? Again, to press *9 or on Zoom if you'd like to comment tonight.
Yeah, thank you, Brett. I do have a fair number of attendees, but I don't see anyone with their hand raised at the moment. Last call, are there any people who dialed into the meeting tonight who wish to speak during public comment? As Brett mentioned, you can hit *9 on your phone or hit the raise hand function in Zoom. Someone did just raise their hand. Dee Dee, I have gone ahead and allowed you to talk. The floor is yours.
Hi, thank you. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
I live on Green Hills Drive. I'm a resident, neighbor, and a citizen here. And I wanted to say that we appreciate all the work on this plan, but in general, the residents and neighbors in this area consider it overkill. We did not ask for all the bells and whistles that appear to be a part of this 10-year-long project. We don't want them all. It's too much. The existing generous roadway that Rita has just mentioned has plenty of surface area to work with within the existing curbs. There's place to paint guidelines for auto, bicycle lanes, no need for bollards. And speaking as a walker, a cyclist, and a driver, I request that you would focus on the fundamentals. I think most of us are on board with adding the roundabouts, which would moderate the auto speeds and be a big change with a big impact, and then resurface the road. That's what we want. We've been wanting. So I would suggest that we then pare back everything else, get it done quickly, and then redirect hopefully any excess funding to all the other Ann Arbor roads that also really need resurfacing and so forth. This is what we, the people, the citizens of these neighborhoods, want from you. And I think if we would take a fresh look at this, the design seems overly complicated, and I think we could do better. I really don't want to see us fixing problems that don't exist or trying to force a one-size-fits-all solution into our neighborhood. Thank you.
Thank you. Looks like we have another one. Raymond?
We do. Adam, I've gone ahead and allowed you to speak. The floor is yours.
Hi, my name is Adam Juskevich in the 4th Ward. I wasn't going to speak tonight, but because there's really nothing to do with these sidewalks on this agenda as far as I know, but since other people were calling in, I felt I should just speak up as a resident of Arbor. And I support this project. I believe that we should put these sidewalks in. I have no concern about level of service. In fact, I don't really think we should be putting as much emphasis on level of service as we do when redoing streets in this city. And I think we should go full speed ahead with adding sidewalks, adding bike lanes, and doing everything we can to make this corridor safer for everyone who uses it, whether that's pedestrians, cyclists, or drivers. Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else can please press *9 or raise hand on Zoom if you'd like to speak.
Not seeing any additional hands raised, Brett.
Yep. Okay. All right. Well, then let's move on to the business portion of the meeting. First up is a spin agreement amendment for e-bikes. Included in our packet is the draft resolution that's scheduled to go to City Council for the possible addition of shared dockless e-bikes provided by Spin. And so I'll ask Raymond to give an overview of the proposal and answer any questions that we all may have. And then at the end of that, we'll ask the commission for a motion on this item. So Raymond?
Yeah, thanks, Brett. I know we've previously reported on this to you, but since we are taking this to the City Council for their consideration and possible approval, we thought we should bring it to you first. So sorry you didn't get this last month. It was still kind of being finalized, but now this is the final version that's both in your packet as well as City Council's packet, all the same materials. So generally speaking, I think many of you know Spin has been operating e-scooters in the community since 2019. The initial deployment started with 200 scooters, and that has slowly ramped up to 400 e-scooters based on the demand in the community and trying to find a nice balance where there isn't a lot of clutter and what have you. There's long been talk about relaunching bike share in the city of Ann Arbor. Before my time here at the city, there was Arbor Bike. Some of you may recall that. That was a docked system. It was a B-cycle system, as I understand it. B-cycle is a subsidiary of Trek. And by docked, I mean you would go up to a docking station, kind of slide a credit card, check a bike out, ride it around, return it back to a docking station to kind of release the ride. That system was discontinued for numerous reasons that I'm probably not familiar with all of them, but so we've been without a bike share system since about, I think, 2017 or so. We were very close to relaunching that docked system right before the pandemic hit. Actually, I think it was like one of the last meetings I went to, and it just never got off the ground. So since then, since 2020, we've been in discussions with different private mobility providers that provide these services. And since we have an existing relationship with Spin, they now offer that in their fleet of vehicles as well. So we've been in discussions with them for a while, and they are willing to bring 100 of their e-bikes to the community. The one note here, the one catch, if it were, is that they are asking for a reduced fee. We currently charge $1 per scooter per day for their fleet to be deployed in Ann Arbor. They're asking that that fee be brought down to 20 cents per vehicle per day. So that would apply to both the scooters and the bikes. And that fee would only be in effect in as long as there are bikes within the fleet, because that reduction in fee is meant to help offset some of the added costs of deploying an e-bike system. The vehicles are more expensive, they're heavier to transport and rebalance, requiring more labor. So it is kind of a conditional sort of reduced fee. This is consistent with the Vision Zero transportation plan. There are strategies about micromobility and how micromobility, especially shared systems, can help provide first and last mile connections. The idea being that, if you take a bus into downtown and you still need to go a little ways, you can hop on an e-bike or hop on an e-scooter. E-bikes also theoretically have a little bit more range than e-scooters. For those of you that have ridden an e-scooter, you're in an upright position. You feel all the bumps on the road because there's not as much cushion. Whereas a bike, many of you might be familiar with what that experience is like, and these are electric bikes as well. So the thought process is that first last mile connection and some of the opportunities to use this form of shared mobility might either attract new people to the system or attract people to it instead of taking other types of transportation like single occupancy vehicles. So for those reasons, it's identified in both the Vision Zero plan as well as the carbon neutrality plan about really giving people these transportation options. We're starting with a deployment of 100 e-bikes, or at least that's the proposal, because we want to see how well the system works. We want to make sure that parking doesn't become an issue. Obviously, these are bigger vehicles. Since they are not docked, they are a dockless system, which just like the e-bikes, you kind of release your ride when you're done with it, you kind of check it out and then check it back in kind of wherever. We want to make sure that, it doesn't lead to obstructions on the sidewalk or, blocking doorways and things like that. So we want to kind of start off with a smaller deployment to make sure that launch is successful. And then we'll be monitoring that space pretty closely to make sure that if there are concerns that are being raised, that we work with Spin to address those as, effectively as possible. The other thing that I did want to note is in part of these discussions with Spin, myself and Trevor Bryden, one of our new transportation planners, we're really asking Spin to come to the table with some additional equity considerations for their deployment. And so starting in February, they actually launched a couple things that apply now, including to the e-scooters, but then would apply to the e-bikes as well. The first is that they have a Spin Access program, which allows for people in affordable housing or moderate means to be able to get a reduced fee on checking out those vehicles. And so they've reached out to several of the affordable housing complexes in town to try to establish those relationships already. So we were happy to see that. The other thing is they're offering a Spin Cash Card. And this is directly targeted for folks who are maybe unbanked or perhaps who don't have smartphones. So the idea is that you can unlock, a ride on one of these vehicles with a kind of a smart card as opposed to, through your phone or, the swipe of a credit card. So again, we're really trying to broaden the reach or at least the opportunity for everyone in the community to be able to use these devices. And we've been satisfied, at least at a staff level, in terms of what Spin has brought to the table, that they've kind of, added some of these considerations in their deployment. So those are the highlights that I wanted to address. Happy to entertain any questions. Pete, I know you had some that I don't know if you wanted me to bring up your email or if you wanted to bring those up, but and I see other hands are going up as well. So Brett, I'll let you moderate that, and then we'll try to take turns and go through the questions that might come up.
Thanks. Yeah, I see people raising their hands. That's great. Thank you. And let's do the raise hand thing or raising your hand too. Julie, you're up first.
Hi, it's really exciting to see the bikes coming back. I've been anxiously waiting for that, and having e-bikes is really great. Two questions. Is the sort of geographical range in which these bikes are permitted the same as for the scooters? And second, if this is successful and we double the number of bikes or triple the number of bikes eventually, what happens to that 20-cent payment that they're paying per vehicle? Is that going to change to the point where we're paying them, or how's that going to work?
Yeah, I have an answer for the first one and speculation on the second. So yes, the coverage, the geographic area of coverage would be the same for both the e-scooters as well as the e-bikes. We do have some opportunities to refine that. Again, if we see issues with deployment, there are some things that we can do. So for example, we can use a tool called geofencing, where if there's certain behavior that's discouraged in a certain area, you can kind of fence that area off, maybe not entirely, but you can kind of put special parameters or restrictions around it. So that's one thing we'll be looking closely at. In terms of if we ever expand the fleet, I think, we don't know if that is in the cards. I will say the plan does call for a more robust rollout. I think it calls for actually upwards of 500 e-scooters and 500 e-bikes. We'd like to kind of gradually ease our way into this to try to find a good balance and make sure that we're meeting the desires of the community for these forms of transportation without having too many on the streets. So whether we're getting it right or not is maybe up for debate. But and admittedly, Julie, we have not spoken to Spin about what the fee structure would look like if there was augmentation of more bikes. I'm sure that would just be a negotiation that we would have when that time comes.
All right, Dharma?
So I had questions about the range too. And well, first of all, this is exciting. You said the range is the same for scooters, but I'm not really aware what the range is for the scooters. So what is the kind of geographic range for use?
So I don't know that there are any. I'd have to double check. I don't think there is a outer limit by which the vehicles can't be used. I know there have been studies, for example, done by the Washtenaw Area Transportation Study about a sort of seamless system between us and IPSI or Eastern Michigan University for folks that want to make those trips. I think there's probably some battery range limitations. Since these are battery assist, that eventually those batteries will kind of run out of juice, and therefore with a bike at least you can continue to pedal, but with the scooter all you can do is kick it through. So I only know right now that there are some geofenced areas like around the diag for e-scooter usage, but beyond that I don't think there's an outer limit to how far folks can go. I can double check on that though.
Okay. Got a couple more questions. Is there a way that we can do they give us data so that we can understand patterns of travel that might help us refine some of our network?
They do, yeah. Currently, it's written into their agreement that they have to share data with us. We use a third-party vendor. Well, they do, that they give us the data through. It's called Populous. It's aggregated, so we don't see any user details or PII or anything like that. It's all aggregated data. And so what we can do is take areas and show where the usage is the strongest, where trips are originating from, where they're ending, and see which paths are being taken. So that is part of it. One thing I will say is the plan actually, or I'm sorry, the agreement actually says that we can get their raw data feeds, not the right thing to call it, but the GBFS feed, which, and forgive me, I don't know exactly what that stands for. I think it's like the shared bike feed. But and this is a national standard for data for these shared micromobilities. I think it was developed in LA, if I remember correctly. We don't have the ability to ingest that data, kind of the raw data. So that's why we take kind of the aggregated data through this third-party Populous. So that's just to say that some of our ability to analyze the data is restricted because it's already sort of analyzed and kind of clustered for us. But if we ever had the ability to kind of ingest the data and further refine it, we could ask for that if need be.
Okay. And is there infrastructure that we should be thinking about providing in terms of just like more racks or, I know that these are dockless, but just thinking about being able to put them in an area that makes sense and stays out of the right of way?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think that's one of the things we want to really monitor closely when it comes to the e-bikes. From our perspective, we probably can't force them out of the right of way, right? I can't force them onto private property. But one of the things that you'll hear from me later on is we are piloting a bike rack program outside of downtown. So downtown has a pretty good concentration of bike racks. But once you get outside of downtown, there are less bike racks, and the bike racks that do exist are probably on private property. So we are looking to pilot. I actually have the team doing research on different types of bike racks right now. And we even have a business that's volunteered to be our guinea pig. So it is something that we are looking for, and I'll go into a little bit more detail on that under the staff report.
Hey, thank you.
All right, Molly.
Thanks. Yeah, I'm really excited about this too. I have a couple of questions. So the first is, are we going to be tracking usage of you mentioned some programs to increase equitable access to the system. So the reduced fares and the cards, are we going to how are we going to track that those are getting used? And if they're not getting used, what are we going to do to try and create programs that actually meet the needs of the people we're trying to help?
Yeah, great question, Molly. And admittedly, I haven't asked that of Spin, but I'll do that in my next check-in. I have a check-in with them every 2 weeks. So I will go ahead and see if they have a way that they can kind of aggregate that data and get that over to us in terms of how many people are using the cash card and how many people are using the reduced fare. That would be really good to know.
Yeah.
That's a good question.
And then my other question is about, there were some issues for a while with scooters being like fully geofenced out of the campus area, and then lots of scooters being sort of dumped around the perimeter of where those boundaries were. I'm wondering, it seems like that has resolved, like there's scooters on campus again, but I'm curious about that, a little bit more about that campus scooter / bike interface and how that's going to be managed, because bikes are so much bigger.
Yeah, that's a good question. There was a kind of technical snafu or glitch that happened, or a miscommunication. So yeah, what Molly's speaking to is, what was that, Molly? About 1.5 years or so ago, maybe 2 years, there was a geofenced area that extended not only on campus, but to parts of downtown, if I remember correctly. And I think it was it was a mistake. There was some direction, I think, that was provided by the university that was misunderstood. And so that's what happened. And as soon as we understood, we were getting a lot of complaints or concerns or issues about that. So we followed up with Spin, and it was addressed as soon as we understood what was going on. What's interesting about these arrangements is, for the e-scooter deployment, while 400 are permitted within the community, 200 are permitted by the city, and the other 200 are permitted by the university. Because we pretty much have an acknowledgement that, these scooters are going to end up on campus, and there are other scooters that are going to end up from campus to downtown and parts of town. So we felt like the best way to do that is to just kind of, cut the agreement in half. Right now with the e-bikes, those are, that is exclusively with us. But my understanding is the university is in similar conversations with Spin. Now, that doesn't mean that an additional 100 are imminent at the university. I think I have a good working relationship with my counterpart at the university, Steve Dolan. And so, I'll be sharing our experience with him, and then he'll probably be making some decisions about, if they're going to look for any additional deployment on campus. In terms of the geofencing that happens on campus, we defer to the university. So if they want to, geofence the diag, that's kind of their prerogative and in their agreements with Spin. So I know the university tries to really encourage the parking of the vehicles. A lot of the campus buildings have racks, in front of every building and in front of every door. So they really try to push that to make sure that both the scooters and the bikes will end up on the racks, as opposed to, chained to handrails or things like that. So, or they're not even chained, right? They're dockless. So yeah, a lot of the stuff related to campus is largely, we have to defer that to the university itself.
Thanks.
All right, Peter?
Thanks. My question was just about how are we doing with scooters on keeping them out of the sidewalks and keeping them where people aren't going to trip over them and be blocked by them. Since a bike in that situation is even worse. So, like, are we doing well with scooters, and can we expect to do well with bikes?
Yeah, I think it's a good question, Pete, and thanks for raising it, because it is something that, as you may recall, there was a different provider that first came to the community back in 2018, and that deployment did experience a lot of complaints about kind of inappropriate parking. Part of the reason why we've been had a little bit more success with Spin is that their operational model is a little bit different. The previous provider was a crowdsourced system where any user could sign up to be part of the system, and then they could take the scooter home and charge it and then redeploy it the next morning, and they would get a bonus. But there were no local staff members from that company within the community. So if there were complaints, there was no one really to help address those complaints. Spin does have staff in the community. So when there is a complaint that's raised, they go out in relatively short order. As a matter of fact, I just heard today from them that they're 2 hours. They try to address any complaint within 2 hours. I also asked our IT department to query our A2Fixit. We do have a category on the app for what we call abandoned scooters. And in the last 365 days, there were 42 complaints that were lodged about inappropriately parked scooters, but 26 of those were already addressed by the time the Spin or the community standards officer showed up. So only 16 of those 42 really required corrective action. One of the things that's interesting, both, it presents a little bit of a challenge, but then also kind of provides this sort of rectifying opportunity, is since these are shared dockless systems, oftentimes what happens if someone does inappropriately leave a scooter or bike where maybe it shouldn't be, someone else may come by pretty quickly to check it out, and then the issue might resolve itself. Now, that's not to suggest that that's good, that the person who released it in the first place shouldn't have done so properly. But as you can see, out of the 42, the vast majority of those 26, by the time we showed up, the issue had already been resolved. So, whether that's too many, too little, I think each one of us might have an opinion or a judgment on that. But 42 over the last 365 days, and 16 of which required corrective actions, is the number that we've experienced.
Right, and I think I saw in the bike description that these have the type of stand that the bike pops up vertically. It's not a leaning kickstand, which would hopefully help with taking up less space and less propensity to fall over. Julie had a question in the chat, right? Julie, asking if these bikes would fit into our bike racks. Not sure if that's something Raymond, offhand.
Well, I think it's a good question. It probably depends, right? There are different types of bike racks out there. So, if it's like the DDA, when I think about the bike corrals that DDA has deployed, I wouldn't see any reason why this wouldn't be able to lean up against that. Or if you have any of the traditional like U-shaped bike racks, there's no reason why you can't lean the bike up against that or use the kickstand. A toaster rack, if you're familiar with those, where you just kind of put your front wheel in, looks like where the way you slide pieces of toast in. There's no reason why it wouldn't fit that. I don't know if like a bike locker or a higher grade facility with the basket, the handlebars, things like that, I don't know how well those would fit in. So I think it probably just depends on the sort of bike rack that you have in mind. But as Brett said too, while we will definitely encourage folks to park in bike racks or adjacent to bike racks, the need to pull into that bike rack, as long as you're adjacent to it, it does have the kickstand, the double featured kickstand that'll keep the bike upright. So,
all right, Dharma.
Are these expected to be deployed year round?
Yes, well, that is the hope, I think, from Spin. They have, the scooters have been around year round now. I think the first year that they were here, maybe they were pulled back, at least in quantity, in the wintertime. But they are seeing usage year round. And I think with the e-bikes, I wouldn't be surprised if the intent is for Spin to operate those year round as well.
So Raymond, I had a question. What does it really mean for a vehicle to be managed and licensed by either the city or the university? Does it impact who gets the 20 cents or currently $1 per vehicle? Or what does it really mean? Because the vehicles obviously traverse, both of those geographic areas. So
yeah, it's largely that fee. When I say 400 e-scooters, for example, are permitted to operate within the city, that's kind of the agreed upon max that we have with the university and the city. But then we get the fee for 200 of them, and then the university gets the fee for the other 200. And the university has its own separate agreement with Spin, but yeah, so the hundreds bikes that we're getting is kind of coming out of our allotment of scooters. And then again, if the university decides for that, then I'm sure they'll negotiate a rate related to their e-scooters as well.
Okay. All right, and the other question is, so Spin they have an exclusive agreement with the city, I assume, right? No other companies we can't agree with other companies to come in and provide the service?
Not exactly. The way it's structured now is we have this, the attachment that you saw in the packet is a right-of-way license agreement that has to be approved by council. So we have been approached by several other providers of both e-scooters and e-bikes. And what we've pretty much said is, we're looking for something new. So we have scooters. We're not looking for a bunch of different e-scooter providers. That would be staff's recommendation. But if a provider really wanted to force the issue, they could, have us bring something to city council. But it is not exclusive in name. It's just that it has to be approved by city council, pursuant to our ordinance, like our micromobility ordinance that we passed.
Got it. Okay. Well, I for one think it's very exciting. I love the opportunity to have bikes or any e-bikes available for people that can't afford to purchase one in the city. And I hope that it goes well and we get more than 100 eventually. Are there any other questions or comments from anyone? Okay, if that's all, then so is there a motion to recommend approval of the amendment to Spin's agreement to include e-bicycles? I see Molly, seconded by Julie. So all those in favor of the motion, please raise your hand or say yes. And all those opposed, please say no or raise your hand. Okay, the motion passes then. All right, so that will be sent to council, right? All right, so next, included in the packet are 2 draft letters related to congressional funding requests. One is related to pedestrian signals and the other is related to the Ann Arbor train station. And so Raymond, if you could please talk about what these requests are and answer any questions. And then after that, we'll again have a motion on these.
Yeah, thanks, Brett. So the city, as well as a lot of other communities across the country, are gearing up for congressionally directed funding. And so everybody is kind of putting together a list of requests. And so the city is putting together a total of, I think, 5 requests, 2 of which related to transportation are, as Brett described, pedestrian signals, as well as the train station. So in a little bit more detail, the pedestrian signals project is estimated at $2.15 million. That would go towards a signal timing evaluation. We want to make sure that we're providing adequate crossing time for pedestrians to go in all directions. While we do have the capability to do that in-house, it's a fairly labor-intensive exercise. And so we want to just be able to knock out the whole system at once and have someone help us with that. The other thing that we want to do is we want to make sure that all of our signals have countdown pedestrian timers, or that the pedestrian signal is a countdown. We've been slowly and surely kind of upgrading these. These are a proven countermeasure. We just recently got a small grant for Highway Safety Improvement Program funds for that. But we just want to kind of get all of our signals up to that standard, make sure that they're all equipped with that. The other thing that we're trying to do is make sure that as many of our signals are accessible pedestrian signals as possible. You've heard us talk a little bit about this in the past, APS. This is when pedestrian signals will have an audible feature that makes them easier to locate for persons with visual impairments. So, might have a homing ping, and then when you push the button, it will, denote that it's, when the crosswalk sign turns on to be able to cross. Not too dissimilar if you've ever used one of our rectangular rapid flashing beacon signs, the yellow flashing signs. There's a little ping that you hear, and then when you push the button, there's a message that comes on, I think, that says yellow lights are flashing. While with this request, we might not be able to upgrade every single signal to APS, we want to try to get a head start and do as many of them as possible with the funding that might come to us. So that's what the pedestrian signal upgrade project is. And then moving on to the Ann Arbor Station, the request is for $1.5 million. I think you've heard us report in the past that the Ann Arbor Station is kind of stuck at the moment. We had done an environmental assessment that was presented to the Federal Railroad Administration, and the Federal Railroad Administration suspended their review of that. That was about a year ago. Since then, we've been in a whole series of discussions with Amtrak, with Federal Railroad Administration, with different folks in the community, with developers, with all kinds of folks, just with Michigan Department of Transportation, trying to figure out what our next steps are. And so in order to really kind of take a good next step forward, again, we need some infusion of dollars. Rail station planning is a very specialized thing that no one on our team has the capacity to be able to do. And so, it's amazing all the little details that you need to know about, like, platforms and how close they can be to the rail and so forth, and the height and all those sort of things. So the idea is to ask for this $1.5 million to assist with the engineering, design, public engagement, and siting discussions for the future Ann Arbor train station. I think you've heard us report in the past that the Ann Arbor train station is the heaviest used train station in the state of Michigan, with more boardings and alightings than any other train station in the state of Michigan, yet it is the smallest train station in the state of Michigan. So the demand definitely seems to be there. We expect demand to grow. And so trying to build a station that will meet not just today's needs, but future needs are kind of what the idea is for behind this congressional request. So, and then just the structure of what you have in your packets. There are two draft letters. They are just kind of general letters of support. They don't have a lot of details really in the application. But the idea is that the letters, there would be a separate letter sent to each of the congressional delegates, right? So this is Congresswoman Dingell, Senator Stabenow, and Senator Peters. And then that would just be a complement to, the petition that's going in. I went with letters of support as opposed to a resolution because letters of support seem to be the preferred methodology. It's just a little bit, I think, easier to track. And so what we're asking for tonight is if the Transportation Commission supports these submittals, to allow Brett as chair to sign those letters of endorsement. In the past, the timing hasn't always worked out where we haven't been able to ask this commission for endorsement, but in this instance, the timing, these are due like this week, maybe next week. And so there's an opportunity for us to actually get an official statement from the commission as a whole that can then be, signed off by Brett. So I'm happy to entertain any questions you might have.
Dharma?
Yeah, speaking to the train station one, to be clear, this is about creating a new plan, not about kind of reviving the old one that I understand was the sticking point for I don't remember the body that reviews it, but.
Yeah, Federal Railroad Administration. Yeah, so yeah, Darmy, I think because we hit a bit of a brick wall with what we call the Fuller site, which is at the base of the hospital, I think we're kind of wanting to go back to the drawing board to reassess the sites. Now, I don't know if that site is off the table entirely or if we need to rethink how it was, positioned. But my understanding is that if that site is considered, there are other sites that are considered as well, that we are not going to put all our eggs in that basket, that they're, we'll go back to look at other sites that were looked at previously and maybe see if there are new ones that present themselves too.
Anything else,
Sorry,
Darby?
thank you. That's it. I just couldn't find my mute button. Unmute button, rather.
Other questions, Molly?
Do we have a sense of how likely these funding requests are to be fulfilled? And do we have sort of like, if we don't get them, is there sort of, we know what's the next and the next way we're going to try and get this funding? Or is it sort of like, we're going to try for this, and if we don't get it, we're moving on, we're doing something else?
I probably don't have a scientific answer about the probability of success, but if I had to guess, it's probably slim, just based on the nature of congressionally congressionally directed funding. A lot of communities are positioning for these requests, and the dollars are finite. So I don't know how good our odds are, but it's a tough game to try to play. So, but we're also, the city is committed to try to leverage as many federal and state dollars as possible to stretch our local dollars as far as possible. So you won't know unless you try. And I think Milton Dahoney, our city administrator, and John Fournier are very much committed to trying to bring in external resources to help advance some of our key infrastructure agenda items. And then in terms of if we don't get this funding, I think they're still on the table. We'll just always look for other opportunities. They might be through sort of these congressionally directed programs, or there are, discretionary grants like Safe Streets for All, which we just got. We had previously applied for a grant administered by Federal Railroad Administration called CRISI. Don't ask me what that stands for. It's CRISI. It has to do with rail station planning. And so we could always try to pursue some of those sort of competitive grant applications too. And then there may be state pots of funding we can try to pursue. So even if we don't get the funding, I doubt we'll give up on these initiatives. It's just about trying to find new opportunities for funding as they present themselves.
Thanks.
Thank you. Any other comments?
I believe my hand is up.
Oh, yep.
Go ahead, Larry.
Well,
Sorry.
So the what we're asking for 1.5 million, right? And is that supposed to cover both the APS project and the train station project?
Good clarifying question, Larry. There are actually two separate requests for two separate amounts. The pedestrian signal project and APS project is for 2.15 million. And then the Ann Arbor station is a separate request for 1.5 million. So in total, those two requests, it's 3.65.
Because obviously I love the APS part, but I go for both. But no, it's a good thing.
Thanks, Larry.
Thank you.
All right. Raymond, anything else you wanted to add? I don't see any other questions or comments. All right. So is there a motion to allow me as chair to endorse the letters of support for the pedestrian signal upgrade project and the Ann Arbor station project? Let me see. It can only be taken as a, okay. We can try a single action to cover both letters first. Dharma, that was the motion, and Megan, was that a second? Is that for both letters, or do we want to split them into two? if we're, okay. Are the motioners, is that okay to do?
I'm fine with both.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right.
I'm fine with that.
So all those in favor of the motion, please say, raise your hand or say yes. Okay, those opposed to the
Yes.
motion, please say no or raise your hand. Okay, it looks like the motion passes. So Raymond, yeah, if you'll just send me those and I'll sign them and get them right back to you as soon as possible.
Will do, Brett. Thanks.
Okay, information and discussion section of the agenda. So the first topic in this section was the resurfacing and related projects update from Jane, but Raymond, there's
Yeah,
a to that, right?
Yeah, sorry, everybody. I regret to inform you that I just found out that Jane Allen won't be able to join us to give that presentation this evening. So we'll just have to postpone this till next month. This isn't typically an action item, so that's maybe not terribly problematic, but yeah, it just didn't come together for tonight. So apologies on that, but we'll definitely make sure to have this front and center for you next month.
Okay, thank you. So next up then is the crosswalk design guidelines topic. So are we joined by Cynthia?
We are. Drum roll. There she
is
is.
to give an overview of the crosswalk design guidelines and answer any questions you may have. Raymond, Cynthia?
Yeah, so Cynthia did join us this evening. Now, admittedly, I do want to thank Cynthia for joining us because she just got out of a traffic calming meeting moments ago. So she's kind of back to back tonight. So Cynthia, if you need a minute, let us know. We do have Nick also giving a presentation tonight. So if you need to switch that around, let us know and we can propose that to Brett. But if you're good to go, I think you should have co-host ability to share your screen.
Yeah, I'm here. I just got promoted, so give me just a quick moment to get all my stuff together, and I'm ready to go. We had a great traffic calming meeting earlier. I just need to turn my video on. Hello, everyone. And let me share my screen, share my presentation. And if you can all confirm that that is coming through.
Yes, it is.
Yep.
All right, great. Well, thank you to the chair for inviting me to be here this evening to talk about our crosswalk design guidelines. As Raymond and I were discussing as we were getting ready for this presentation, that it's been a while since we presented to the Transportation Commission on the crosswalk design guidelines, and that a lot of the current members of the Transportation Commission were not members at that time. And we wanted to just bring everybody up to speed, and I know that there are some questions. So what I wanted to discuss with you this evening, so the slide reads tonight's topics: why Ann Arbor has crosswalk design guidelines, how the guidelines were developed, what new information is available to us after having developed and used these guidelines for a while, and how staff use the guidelines. And so I move forward to our next slide, which reads, why develop crosswalk design guidelines? And we have a process graphic here. And what I wanted to express to everyone is that creating the crosswalk design guidelines was a recommendation that came out of the Pedestrian Safety and Access Task Force final report. That report was produced in 2015. And as we knew that was going to be one of those recommendations, we were really prepared to start working that as soon as the final report came out. We started working on developing these guidelines in late 2015 and throughout 2016 as well. So this process graphic shows that the things that developed as the really compelling interests were context sensitive design, best practices, consistency, and putting all those together to lead toward improved access and safety in crosswalks, with a particular emphasis on uncontrolled crosswalks. So how do we develop these guidelines? The guidelines started as a staff research project. We did a review of what the current research was telling us and informing us. And we did a review of what our peer cities were doing with their design practices. We also did a review of national best practices. We did synthesis of that, took it out for community engagement, and we had a process of several community engagement meetings where we talked with the community about what was important, what they wanted us to focus on, creating a shared understanding of what the values for the project were and what we wanted our outcomes to be. And all of that worked towards that goal of, and as I have a small image on here of that process flow chart of getting to that point. And at this point, I really do want to acknowledge that we had great representation from our Disabilities Commission in that process, and that was Larry, and that he was really invaluable, and he was so just really great input into that process, and I'm still happy about it. So I wanted to acknowledge that. And he probably remembers a lot of this stuff. But so moving on to the next slide, I wanted to give a little bit of an overview of what our guidelines are. So as the slide reads, we have several uses for these crosswalk design guidelines. We use them with our resident requests, with our design projects, with our transportation impact assessment, and planning for future needs. This slide also has a graphic of the design flow chart. A couple things that are really important to point out about this flow chart. I cut down on the slides, but I want to highlight a few things so that we have plenty of time for discussion. This flow chart has two sides to it. One is for controlled crosswalks and one is for uncontrolled crosswalks. And as we were developing this process, we really wanted to be forward thinking and progressive. And one of the first things that we did was we decided that we didn't need a minimum number of pedestrians to install a crosswalk. At the time, there was kind of best practice, conventional wisdom sort of policy that a lot of agencies had toward having a minimum number of pedestrians to install a crosswalk. We acknowledged that often a corridor can be a barrier to non-motorized activity, and we didn't want to perpetuate barriers, and we wanted to look at the system and see if in the context of the system, does a connection point make sense here? So we took that decision out of the guidelines, and that is, staff evaluate every request that we get for a new crosswalk and determine if it makes sense in the context of the system. So this process really starts after having made the decision that, yes, we're installing a crosswalk here, or it starts at the point where we have an existing crosswalk and we're evaluating. I will also point out that that one of the tools that we use is the NCHRP 562 report. Now, NCHRP stands for the National Collaborative Highway Research Program. So that's federal research. And there's a tool that came out of that research that we rely on. It's a spreadsheet-based tool that takes all of these inputs you see over on the right side of our flow chart. where we're looking at pedestrian volume and vehicular volume, crossing distance, walking speeds, vehicle speeds, and what our crash history is. And all of those data inputs go in, and it comes out with kind of a risk assessment and what type, some recommendations for what type of crosswalk you need to be installing. And we use that output to feed into our standard design options, our standard plus design options, or our high risk design option categories. That tool requires a minimum pedestrian volume in the evaluation process. So we always feed it the minimum. If we know what we have and it exceeds the minimum, then we use that number, but we always feed it that minimum so that we can proceed with the analysis. Just as a kind of disclaimer that some of our consultants that we work with have had a little bit of difficulty with that, but that's always the recommendation that we give them because we want them to be using the output of the tool. Okay, so as I said, with this process, it looks at a lot of different factors, and then, looking at the volume and the crash history and the context that we're designing it feeds into giving us this output of one of these three standard design options, standard plus design options, or the high risk design options. So that standard is really the baseline that we will accept on any type of roadway. And we do this both for the uncontrolled crosswalks and for the controlled crosswalks. So let's go ahead and move forward to the next slide, which really shows us what those design options are. So as I said, this slide, it goes through design options, and this is the design selection for uncontrolled crosswalks. The slide reads that we select devices based on street type and design level. Items accumulate from left to right, and not all devices will be used in all locations. So if we look at that chart, there's a graphic on the right side of the slide that is our design options matrix. And this chart has rows that are street type of local, collector, minor and major arterials under 3 lanes, and minor and major arterials greater than or equal, 3 lanes or more. And those are vehicular lanes. And then we have a column for standard, standard plus, and high risk. And if we look at collector, the standard for an uncontrolled crosswalk on a collector street is high visibility pavement markings. If there's enough activity or speeds are high enough that we are up into that standard plus design, what's listed here are pedestrian warning series, which is our W11-2 signs. And those are the diamond signs with the walking person on them. Or you could also have the school warning series signs. And those are pentagons with the points up, and it has an adult and a youth walking person on those signs. Putting those signs in does not preclude having the high visibility pavement markings. So you still have the high visibility pavement markings, and then you're adding the signs. And then if we're moving up to a high risk location, which might happen if we've had crash history here, then you're looking at some additional items. Moving to the next slide, we also have a design selection for our controlled locations. So the slide reads the same as the last slide. Selected devices are based on street type and design level. Items accumulate left to right, and device options are more limited, just because we don't have as much flexibility in design because it's already a controlled intersection. The control types are stop controlled, signalized, and roundabout that we have here. each of those control types is broken up by street type, and then we have our design options for standard, standard plus, and high risk locations as well. Excuse me. Moving forward, I wanted to touch on what some of our accomplishments have been since we first we first started using the crosswalk design guidelines. Now, keep in mind, we finished those up in 2016. We started using them immediately within our own design work. And then as we started using them and finding them to be successful, we started incorporating them into other work as well. So this slide reads accomplishments, system-wide updates to meet or exceed minimum design requirements on major streets. So that was one of the first big projects that we did with these crosswalk design guidelines. We looked at corridors throughout the city and analyzed them to figure out what the minimum for that corridor was, and made sure that we're meeting at least the minimum on all the major streets. Since then, we've started upgrading some of those crosswalks, but we did meet that baseline first. Another accomplishment that we have is full utilization in our design, evaluation, and development process. So internally, transportation staff are always using these. And when our colleagues who are the capital project managers or in our design team, they know that these exist. And if we have a crosswalk, they know that we need to make sure that we're evaluating those as parts of projects. I would also point out this last bullet point, which is integration of transportation impact analysis. Well, I guess I should have said integration with transportation impact analysis for uncontrolled crosswalks during the site plan review. This is a really important step because at the time, there wasn't a good way to, there wasn't a good resource to point an applicant's team towards for determining what their impacts to an uncontrolled crosswalk might be. So if you have uncontrolled crosswalks in their study area, this is how we were having everyone analyze those crosswalks and see if they were having an impact, if there needed to be any upgrades to a crosswalk prior to having those new trips in an area. And moving to my next slide, I really wanted to touch on the fact that these guidelines were developed in 2015 and 2016. There has been a lot of new research that has come out. There has also been a lot of change to city policy. So this slide touches on new information and innovations that have occurred. And the slide reads, improving crosswalks and field guide. And that is a very shorthand way to refer to two really important documents that have come out of the Federal Highway Administration. And I'll be covering these a little bit more in the next slide. Both of these documents have very long titles, so I didn't want to put them all there. But this new guidance really is consistent with the crosswalk design guidelines that we developed pretty much in parallel to when they were developing this, but the information is presented a little bit differently. We also have Ann Arbor moving together that has been adopted. The Safe Systems National Strategy has come out, which is really supporting the work that we're doing with these crosswalks. And also, another new thing that has happened is that the Highway Capacity Manual has a new edition. And I'm sure a lot of you are familiar with the concept of the Highway Capacity Manual, and it is that sort of traditional, we're looking at vehicular traffic flow and we're assigning a level of service. And that level of service was based on delay. It was graded A to F, A being good and F failing. And those modules, they looked at two-way stop controlled intersections where you just have control on side street, highways, freeways, interchanges, signalized intersections, controlled intersections, and it was always a very vehicular-based module. They have started in the last couple editions incorporating more information on other modes of travel. And this new edition of the Highway Capacity Manual, which is the 7th edition, really has a lot more emphasis on being a multimodal analysis. And it is multimodal is actually in the name of it now. And this is really important. But I don't have a lot to say about it yet because we just got our copy in the last 2 weeks and I'm just starting to dig into it. But what I have looked at so far as sidewalk level of service, it looks very promising. So I'm pretty excited about that. And I just wanted to point that out as being a new tool in our toolbox. Okay, moving forward, this slide is a mostly graphic slide. And as I said, those two documents that I briefly referenced in the slide before this, the Guide for Improving Pedestrian Safety at Uncontrolled Crossing Locations, and its companion, the Field Guide for Selecting Countermeasures at Uncontrolled Pedestrian Crossing Locations, are two documents that the Federal Highway Administration produced in 2018. And these documents are really important. One is that they're kind of getting away from the older philosophy of you have to have a certain number of pedestrians and how you looked at determining how you need to design a crosswalk. So they've taken that volume component for pedestrians out. And this figure that's shown here is a graphic and it's from the Field Guide. And it has a column for roadway configuration, and that's based on vehicular lanes. So we have 2 lanes, 3 lanes with a raised median, 3 lanes without a raised median, 4 lanes with a raised median, and 4 lanes without a raised median. Then there are 3 large brackets that are based on vehicular volume. So you have streets that are under 9,000 vehicles per day, streets that are between 9,000 and 15,000, and streets that are over 15,000. And within those 3 larger brackets, there are breakdowns for speed. And that's based on under or equal to 30 miles per hour, 35 miles per hour, and 40 or above. And there are a whole list of devices that are countermeasures, and they're numbered 1 through 9. You'll recognize those as all existing in our crosswalk design guidelines. And the numbers that you see in the different squares, they correlate to those devices. And you can, there's are items that you should really be considering in this location. You always need to be installing. Those are the little black ones, and that's like pavement markings. And then items that, it's a really good idea to do it, and then items that you could think about doing. And then if a number is missing, that means it's not recommended for that location. So what does this mean for our crosswalk design guidelines? Currently, the way staff is using this tool is that when we're evaluating location, we'll look at it through our crosswalk design guidelines, but then we'll also look at this guidance from Federal Highway. And most of the time they line up and they come up with the same result. Occasionally, one or the other will be more conservative, and we always pick the more conservative design. So I realized that all of that was a little bit quick, but thought we were going to have less time, and I wanted to make sure we had plenty of time to answer questions and have discussion. And so I just wanted, I have my question slide because I always make my question slide, and the slide is showing an image of the new intersection of North U and State Street, just because it looks really cool. So I will leave my slide deck. Should I leave my slide deck up in case we need to reference something, or do you want me to take it down for now?
I could foresee maybe referencing some of the tables. So I can see raised hands. So if you could use the raised hand feature, or Larry, just unmute, that works too. So let's do that. Let's start with Peter.
So if we could go back to the table that has the guidelines for uncontrolled crossings.
The city table or the federal highway table?
City table.
Sure.
So generally, I do wish that this was a little more proscriptive. And I've got a couple of critiques, I guess. One of them is that we have less than or equal to 3 lanes in one row, and we have greater than or equal to 3 lanes in the other row. So it technically a 3-lane minor or major arterial could use either of those 2 rows. So we need to clarify where a 3-lane road really goes.
Yeah, I apologize. That is a typographical error that I did not catch as I was recycling these slides from the last presentation. And the 3 lanes would go in the higher bracket.
In the second from the bottom row. Okay.
Yes. So minor and major arterials, 3 lanes or more.
The other question I have about this slide then is, we say not all devices will be used in all locations. So we've said what should be considered, and then we've immediately said we're not going to use all of them, and we haven't said how many of them we're going to use. And so according to this page, we can do anything and meet and still, be consistent with the guideline. So I guess I would like to say that I would like it, as I said, to be more prescriptive. Maybe not all devices will be used, but some minimum number needs to be chosen. We need to use 2 out of 3, or we need some good indication for why we're not using one of them. So as it is, these guidelines feel like that we can use any of these things anywhere and choose not to use them also. So I guess that's my major critique of our guidelines.
Great, thank you. Dharma?
This is really helpful, so thank you for the presentation. Just have a few questions. So one question I have is, related to the fact that you said that there's, new information and innovations have come about since we created this. And it sounds like staff is starting to dig in. Does it make sense for this group to take on, and I'm not sure what level of involvement this group had before, in updating our standards with fresh eyes based on some of the new federal guidelines and research coming out?
Well, I can answer the question of what level of involvement this group had in that process. None, because it didn't exist. So this was a staff-led process.
Easy one.
Yeah, yes. And as I said, the federal highway, it came out in 2018, and it has been a companion to the work that we're doing. And typically they come out in the same place.
I'm not sure what you mean by that. Sorry. You mean,
So if I pick a location and I run it through our crosswalk design guidelines, and then I, in parallel, run it through the federal highways field guide, we usually come up with both processes usually come up with the same set of solutions.
okay. I
And
don't know. Okay, go ahead, sorry.
if one of them is more conservative than the other one, we'll go with the conservative design.
Okay. Do we ever look at, I think you suggested that maybe we do kind of a qualitative look at before and after, but I'm particularly interested in sites where there have been crashes if we collect data kind of before and after treatment to evaluate how successful our implementation was.
We have that data. We do not run a before and after on every location that we update, because an update can be going from straight 6-inch crosswalks markings to continental high visibility crosswalk markings, or it can be adding a sign, or it can be adding a like bright sides, something that we're doing in a more systemic nature, and there might not have been a crash history at a location. What we are routinely tracking is what the system is doing.
And then another question is, do we evaluate, I don't know what the terminology would be for this, but sight lines? And the reason why I bring this up is because I've been talking to some people about crosswalks around Pioneer High School, and there's one particular corner that's actually at a signalized stop, but on both corners, there's sort of fencing and brushes that make it very difficult to kind of see around. So long story short, I'm just wondering if that's ever a consideration as we implement crossings.
Yes, it is a standard consideration.
Okay, cool. And then just in closing, that's it with my questions. I would just suggest that I'm not sure how the rest of the commission feels, but I would welcome the opportunity to take a fresh look at these and see if we, it's time to update or tweak anything, just because it sounds like things evolve. It might be good to take a fresh look.
Yeah, I was just about to ask, to what extent, Cynthia, are you and your team in the process of updating our approach or looking to update our approach? And I feel like I sense an opportunity for a subcommittee even maybe, or to roll this into the larger approach about how we handle street resurfacing as a matter of course in this city. Yeah. Where are you on updating our approach?
My technical recommendation, if we're interested in making an update and a change, would be to just utilize the federal highway guidelines. They're standard. All of our consultants are familiar with them. They are easy to utilize. There are compromises that we made when we set up our crosswalk design guidelines, where we wanted to be able to do things by proxy if we needed to. So if we needed to make a proxy decision without having vehicular data in a block or in a chunk of street, or more recent, more up to date. That's part of the reason why, things are broken down by street type. And we wanted to be able to sort of have that little bit of a proxy selection. But really what we were striving to accomplish with these guidelines is well acknowledged by the federal highway document. Although I will point out that is just for uncontrolled locations. And frequently when we're having these discussions, the locations that are in everyone's mind really are those uncontrolled locations. And they're not as much the signalized locations or like all-way stop controlled locations. So my recommendation is that if we want to update things, that is an excellent tool to be updating. It is a really well done document and a really well done process, and it would be easy for staff and consultants to follow.
Okay, that's the table later in the slides, right?
Yes.
If you could go to that briefly, just while we're on this real quick. So there are very few dark colored circles here, which are the should always be considered category. And then there are many usually other options that are listed. So I guess if the city were to adopt this, how would it I mean, would it only consider itself responsible to incorporate the dark colored circles, or
Yeah, that's a great question, and the answer is no, because all of those not dark circles are things that you have to make an engineering decision on, and the same is true with our crosswalk design guidelines, and that there are options in there, particularly because right of way is a constrained resource, and a particular location may have an option for bump outs or a pedestrian island. And the team has to make a design decision as to which of those features make sense with the space that we have. So there's still a need to allow for some engineering judgment, and that's why you don't have more of the black circles. But the way you would be applying this particular document, so if you were looking at, let's say the very first square, it's a 2-lane street, under 9,000, you're under 30 miles per hour. You should have crosswalk markings. And if you have crosswalk markings, they should be high visibility. You should have parking restricted so that you can have appropriate sight distance, and the adequate nighttime lighting levels are all things that we are currently addressing. So having all of those things there on streets is a typical design practice of the cities already. But then, our other numbers are 2, which is a raised crosswalk. 4 is a curb, is the in-street pedestrian crossing sign. 5 is a curb extension. 6 is a pedestrian refuge island. You're not going to build a raised crosswalk and a pedestrian refuge island and curb extensions or bump outs all in the same crosswalk. You're going to pick which one makes the best sense for the location, for the area. If you wanted to raise that crosswalk and do a truly sidewalk height to sidewalk height crossing, your current drainage infrastructure might line up perfectly for that, and then that's an option. If it's not, and redesigning the underground stormwater system is outside of your budget, then you might be looking at a pedestrian refuge island, because the curb extensions would also be a problem. So those are kind of like the design trade-offs or design decisions, I should say, that need to be made with those not dark numbers.
Okay. Yeah, thank you. Yeah, this is I think this is an opportunity to strive for the most and have to be convinced why not, especially like in this box, number 2, raised crosswalk. This is a vertical element that right now I think it seems to really only be provided through our neighborhood traffic calming program, right? And this kind of maybe gives us the opportunity to move that into other toolboxes outside of just the neighborhood traffic calming program. Personally, it's something that I would like to see. But let me get back to the other commissioners. Molly?
Yeah, so I have a question. If we were to use the federal highway guidelines, is that Federal Highway Administration guidelines? I'm curious how those align with our moving together towards Vision Zero transportation plan and the countermeasures that are recommended in there. My impression is that in general, the Federal Highway Administration tends to have priorities that are perhaps different from ours as a city when it comes to allocating space on roads and moving people through spaces. And so, I mean, I'm sure this helped inform the transportation plan, but I'm curious about how well you feel those guidelines align with the vision that's outlined in the transportation plan.
These guidelines are consistent with Vision Zero design. These guidelines are developed to be countermeasure selection tool explicitly for improving pedestrian safety at uncontrolled locations. And historically, I would say that your concern is valid, and on the freeway section, on the freeway system, that is still very much a valid point, because that is all about moving vehicles. But I think it's important to recognize the work that Federal Highway has been doing through their STEPS program, through their Everyday Counts program, and moving that whole system toward the safe systems national strategy for eliminating fatalities and serious injuries.
Thank you.
Peter?
My question was essentially what Molly just asked. But I guess I will also add that we have very ambitious goals for cutting down on vehicle miles traveled and encouraging people to walk and bike instead. That, I mean, ambitious goals that I don't think the federal government shares. So I guess I'm not totally sure how well aligned these guidelines would be with our ambitious goals for encouraging walking and biking and so forth. So maybe this would be a good starting point, but I feel like we would still need to take a close look at them and make sure that they are aligned with what we want in our community before we adopt them. That was one thing. And then also to your point about the possible design trade-offs, if drainage doesn't support one design, then we should use a different design element. I'm okay with design guidelines that allow that kind of flexibility, but the way it should be stated is you have to use one of these three treatments. You have to use the one that's most appropriate. And I don't see that kind of phraseology in our city design guidelines, and I don't see it in here either. It says you should consider all of them, which implies that using none of them is also okay so long as you consider them. And I am looking, like I said, for guidelines that are more prescriptive and that require us to do more to protect people crossing the street. Or either do more or explain why there's a really good reason why we can't do more. Those are the guidelines I'm looking for.
Molly?
Sorry, I forgot to put my hand down.
Having to do the hand thing yet, huh?
Yeah, I'm like still adjusting.
Yeah, I think building on what Peter said, like if we were to adopt something like what we're seeing here, the colored in circles are great and everything, but I wouldn't want to have the numbers that aren't circled seem to have kind of a lower or very optional status, and I wouldn't want that to be the case. I would want us to interpret all of the options shown as strong considerations and not like Peter said, oh, we thought about it, but no. Yeah. So I don't know. We'll have to talk about this as maybe a future agenda or item, a business item to send a recommendation. Or I think needs to be a lot more work beforehand, though, to actually really dig into what's here and compare it to what we have now. Because especially the vertical elements is something new that is not at all part of our current crosswalk guidelines, right? The virtue of having a raised crosswalk here is something very new, and hopefully that's something that would be acceptable. Anyway, I could see this coming back. Any other questions or comments? Good. Yeah, I didn't have anything else. Okay. If there's nothing else, let's can we go back to the non-screen sharing view?
Definitely.
There we go. Okay. Get back to this. All right. So seeing no other comments, let's I guess Raymond is all right to move on to the next topic.
Yes, indeed.
Okay. All right. Thank you very much, Cynthia. That was really informative. Okay, next up, sidewalk gap prioritization process with Nick. Nick will give an overview of the sidewalk gap prioritization process and answer any questions.
All right, thank you. Let me share my screen here and get my, okay, can everybody see that?
Yes.
Okay, cool. All right, so it's kind of funny, Cynthia kind of took some of the words out of my mouth here in saying that we presented this to the Transportation Commission a long time ago, but we've got mostly new people now. So we are kind of doing the same thing here with doing a refresher on this and a little bit of an update on where we stand with sidewalk gap prioritization. Oh, there we go. Okay. So I'm going to go through a brief little history lesson here, and then I'm going to spend most of the time talking about the prioritization system itself, and then talk about how we actually take that into programming, a little bit about the challenges we face, and a quick preview of upcoming projects too. So from the history perspective here, the need to fill sidewalk gaps is something that was identified quite a while ago. It was identified in the old non-motorized plan, which predated the current transportation plan. And as far as I can tell, a placeholder was put in the CIP for sidewalk gap filling back somewhere around 2006, sorry. But it sat there for a while before anything really got moving on it. And the need to prioritize was something that was identified pretty soon, pretty early on. And I'll talk, like I said, I'll talk more about that in a minute here. But we did start moving ahead with more sidewalk gap filling projects in the early 2010s. It was somewhat slow. And part of the issue there is that at that time, city code still required that we special assess for new sidewalks, meaning that the adjacent property owner had to pay for that cost. That led into the what we call the new sidewalk millage, the sidewalk gap millage, if you want to call it that was approved by voters in 2020. That millage provides approximately $1.4 million per year. And as part of that adoption by voters, city code was changed so that parcels that are currently on the tax roll do not have to be special assessed for those anymore. So that removed a big hurdle in sidewalk gap filling, gave us a dedicated funding source, and we didn't have to go through the special assessment process. So the prioritization system, which was the first version set up in 2017, which was not that long ago, but has gone through a couple of renovations since then. We're actually on version 3.0 right now. So before I really get into talking about gap prioritization, the first kind of question that comes up is, what is a sidewalk gap exactly? The way we've defined a sidewalk gap is any location in the public right of way adjacent to a street that does not currently have sidewalks on it. So you think of a traditional gap as maybe like a parcel or two where there's no sidewalk, but there's sidewalk in either end. That's certainly a gap, obviously, but also, a sidewalk gap is also in those neighborhoods where there otherwise is no sidewalk. That's also, scored on our prioritization system as well. So a little bit of data here on our sidewalks. We have 440 miles of existing sidewalks, 142 miles of gaps as we define them, as I just described. And we have made some progress. We've added about 13 miles of sidewalks since 2013, for example. Now, the initial prioritization effort really came out of the Pedestrian Safety and Access Task Force, which predated the Transportation Commission, I believe. And as we developed the system initially, one of the things we recognized is with 142 miles of sidewalk gaps, we did not have and still do not have the staff resources to manually evaluate every gap in the system through the criteria that we want to use. So we wanted to make it as automated as possible. And that's still very important in terms of looking at the criteria. So most of the criteria that we have right now are able to be automatically scored through our GIS system. And that's very important in terms of, managing that prioritization and keeping it up to date, because as things change in the GIS, it can automatically update the scores. So the prioritization criteria, I'm going to go through these one at a time so you can be familiar with what they are. But before I go into each one, the way the system works, and there is included in your packet, there is a more detailed listing of the scoring and how exactly the points are allocated and all of that. I won't go into that much detail here, but it's there if you're interested. There's nine categories that we score on, and each one of those is worth a maximum of 10 points. But not all of those categories are necessary or should necessarily be equal either. What we did was we went through a weighting exercise for each of the prioritization criteria, and we use the same process that we use in the CIP so that it's consistent with that in terms of determining which criteria should be weighted more than others. And so as I go through this, the percentages you see in parentheses after it are the results of that prioritization or that process of weighting. So going through these, the first one, and they're in order of their weight. Pedestrian auto crashes is the top one, and this is a pretty simple one. Basically, the location gets full points if there's more than one PED auto crash within the last 5 years within 300 feet of the gap. There's not many of those, so not many locations get points for this, but it's an all or nothing type thing, and that's something that we do have to do a little bit of manual work on that to put that in, but it's relatively easy to do. The second criteria is proximity to schools. Obviously, that's an important factor for our school children being able to walk to and from school, and that's just a straight up distance from a school. And there's various different, based on the distance, there's different points that it's awarded. Third category is evidence of community support. And this is kind of important because this is really the only criteria that residents can directly affect. So if somebody's really interested in getting a certain sidewalk gap filled, this is where that they can boost up one gap maybe over some of its peers, I suppose. And and it's scored several different ways. A single request will get it some points, but then somebody can also submit a petition as well, and based on kind of the number of people you get to sign that petition, you get more and more points up to the full 10. The other note on here, I didn't put it in a bullet point, but also if there's evidence of community support, can also be actually paths worn into the right of way where people are using it even though there's no sidewalk there. So that is factored into here as well. And also if we get requests from an advocacy group like the Disabilities Commission or whatnot, then that gets it points as well. So, and the details are on that attached sheet. The fourth item is transportation equity. And that's based on this map here that you see in the picture. And this comes out of, it's not in the transportation plan, but it's in, Raymond can correct me when I get this wrong, but it's in some of the supporting documents, I think. So, this is pretty simple. There's 5 categories there, and it basically gets 2 points per category as it moves up the kind of the equity chart there. Number 5 out of our 9 categories is the road classification, whether it's a local versus a major primarily. And the idea behind that is that if we don't have sidewalks on major streets with higher volumes of traffic, with faster moving traffic, that those gaps would score more points, based on sort of a proxy for safety and to some degree. But we also capture in this the concept of whether there's sidewalk existing on one side of the road or not already, because that was something that was suggested in one of the previous revisions that was added, that a location that has no sidewalk on it on either side of the street should maybe be a higher priority than other locations that don't. So number 6 is proximity to various different attractors. I don't have my list is on another screen here, but those various other attractors are parks, government buildings, libraries, shopping areas, things like that. So, and that's just a standard distance. Based on the distance, the closer it is, it gets more points. So then we have proximity to transit. That's basically those just a straight distance from your bus stops. And pretty straightforward there. Number 8 is referencing the transportation plan. In the transportation plan, we have locations that are identified as critical gaps. So if it's on that list, it gets points for this category, and if it's not, it doesn't. And then finally, the last one is whether or not the gap is adjacent to a city-owned parcel. We kind of joked before because we kind of informally consider this the shame on you factor. So if it's next to a city parcel and we haven't filled the gap yet, that it should get some points for that. As you can see, this is actually the lowest scored one, or the lowest weighted criteria. And a note here that's kind of important too is the vast majority of these are adjacent to city parks. And as you can see in the example right there next to Almendinger Park. So the nuance on that is that because the sidewalk gap millage can't pay for filling sidewalk gaps adjacent to non-taxable parcels, our Parks Department actually has to fund these. So it needs to, as we work on gaps in these areas, we need to work with our Parks Department to make sure that they've got it, kind of prioritized as well. So all of that, all of those criteria and all of the weights that go along with them then feed into the calculations to come up with a score for each gap. And the results of that can be seen on our dashboard. Maybe you may remember last month when I talked about dashboards. We have another dashboard for this as well at a2gov.org/A2 sidewalk gaps. And anybody can come in and take a look at that. We have some kind of dashboard information about, miles of sidewalk and all that kind of thing. It also shows you can click on an individual one to see what its score was. And we kind of have it categorized into these 6 different categories that you see down at the lower right of the screen there, from highest priority down to lowest priority. Okay, so then programming, we use that dashboard and our, and where it lives in our GIS a lot as we're going into trying to program sidewalk gap projects. And so we take the results from that prioritization system, look at those scores, and we use that to create actual projects in the CIP. So larger gaps, larger, bigger, expensive projects, higher, maybe some higher scoring clusters might get put into the CIP as a standalone project itself. So an actual named project. Some of the smaller little bits of gaps here and there, we don't put all of those in as their own projects. Instead, we kind of have an annual sidewalk gap filling general catch-all category. It's kind of similar to what we do with our local and major streets in the CIP. So some of the small gaps will get picked up in that kind of, annual gap filling program. And then we also look at as we do the CIP and create those projects at some of our other road and utility projects and whether they have gaps along them. And if generally we're looking at categories that are in, anywhere from mid-high to highest. So the top 3 categories on that. If a gap scores in there, then we will consider looking at including it in that other project, whether it's a road resurfacing or a water main replacement project or whatnot. If it's feasible and if the funding is available for it. Like I said, we have a limited amount of funding for this, so we do what we can to try to include that in existing projects and take advantage of work that's already happening. Okay, challenges. Certainly removing the special assessment was alleviating a major challenge in filling sidewalk gaps, but there's still others. There's technical challenges. And I'll mention the picture I selected for this slide right now. That's on Getty's Road out on the east edge of the city. And I selected that one because it highlights a bunch of these challenges. The first one is the technical challenges just with grades and how actually technically difficult it would be to build a sidewalk at a location. For example, in the picture, you see guardrail on both sides of the street. We put guardrail in when there's a steep slope on either side of the road, right? So where are you going to put sidewalk there? The second challenge is tree impact. On in a more typical residential area, we'll do whatever we can. We'll work with property owners. We'll try to go around trees. But there's always going to be some impacts when we do sidewalk gaps. So that's a major challenge. And again, this slide highlights that as well. As you can see trees on both sides of the road at a place where we would consider putting a sidewalk. So, and both of those things really lead to the third one, which is cost. In some cases, we have some pretty high scored projects that are going to be very, very expensive to do and will take more than 1 year's worth of the sidewalk gap millage in order to complete. This would be one of those examples. And then finally, there's, the elimination of the special assessment did not entirely eliminate resident opposition either. Oftentimes, sidewalk gaps are supported by the community in general, but less so oftentimes is the case with the actual adjacent property owners. And so a lot of time we'll meet a lot of resistance to these projects from that side of things. So real quick, I'm just going to run through some, just so you can get kind of a preview of what's coming up the next few years. And I don't have the full limits on here. If anybody has any questions later on, I can certainly, or look in the CIP or whatnot to see more details on these projects. But this year we've got sidewalk gaps going in, being filled on Broadway, on Brooks, Earhart, Newport, and Sire Church as well. Next year in 2024, we've got the big one coming up, which is pictured right there in that bottom picture. That's Main Street, east side, across from Pioneer, next to the golf courses there. The #1 scored sidewalk gap in the city right there. So that one is slated for 2024 and will suck up a big chunk of the budget. Also, several other locations that we're looking at in 24 on Argo, Beeks, and Stone School as well. And one more here. 2025, we've got sidewalk gaps kind of penciled in for Brockman and Crestland, Barton Drive up near M14, and the Apple Pear area, which is up on the east side of Pontiac Trail, kind of near Northside Steam. 2026, we've got Dexter Road. That is going to be a big one there. Is also going to suck up a lot of the budget for that year as well. All right, and so all of that said, I will end the presentation there, and we can take any questions that you might have.
All right, questions.
There we go. Okay, I'm
Thank
unchaired.
Thank you very much, Nick. What questions do people have? Comments? Peter.
Nick, I thought I heard you say that the millage couldn't be used for parcels that weren't on the tax rolls. Did I hear that?
You did.
Isn't Main Street adjacent to the University golf course?
It is. And the university is actually committed as a partner on that and will be paying for a portion of that project. So that actually has helped free up a little bit of the budget for that project. We're also getting federal aid for that project as well. So
okay, but it's not on there. It's not on that property. Is not on the tax rolls.
It is not. No, but
so are we not using the millage? We're not using the millage for it.
We are using the millage for part of that because that's not all the university's property. Ann Arbor Golf and Outing is at the corner there. And they are a tax-paying parcel, so we will be using part of some of the millage money for that project.
Okay, I guess I will also observe, as you did, that I haven't noticed that the millage has appreciably decreased resident opposition at all, and we see a lot of opposition for some reason that I don't understand to filling sidewalk gaps. So even tonight we saw it or heard it. Okay, thank you.
Darla?
Yeah, just speaking, I really appreciate this presentation and the dashboards, which I've been looking at as we've been talking. I think referencing the fact that we have gotten so much pushback on the Earhart sidewalk gap. I'm sorry to put you on the spot, so feel free to push this off, but I was wondering if you could speak directly to, like, you talked about the scoring system, but could you talk to it applied to this project?
Yeah, I can. I might put that off a little bit because I don't have a lot of the details in front of me right there for that specific location. But being that it's adjacent to a project that we're working on right now, it was something that we felt was an important element to include in the project as we're doing a lot of other things with the road to improve vehicular, pedestrian, bicycle safety. That was an important element that needed to be included as well. I don't know if that really answers your question, but
yeah, it does partially. But it was also my understanding that there was quite a bit of community support for this, voiced in numerous meetings. And I'm not sure if I think it was identified as a critical gap by the city. I'm kind of wondering about those other factors.
We did hear. I wasn't attending myself some of the public meetings that we had on that project directly, but from what I understand, we did hear a lot of community support for the sidewalk, and that goes back to what I kind of mentioned before: is that in general, the community supports filling sidewalk gaps, but where the opposition really comes is the adjacent property owners in most cases. So, and I think Earhart is an example of that.
Yeah, I think it's important to point out the network effects of these sidewalks and regional connectivity. So it's not just meant to serve the adjacent property. It's meant to serve our community and a way to get from place to place.
Absolutely, yes. Yeah, it's sidewalks are really a community asset. And that's part of the reason that it kind of made sense to take away the special assessment aspect of it as well. That the special assessment kind of speaks to the benefiting property owners paying for it, but it's the adjacent property owners are not the only beneficiaries. It's really a community benefit.
I actually do have a follow-up question. So say a condominium development came up today, what would be the requirements in terms of creating sidewalk along with that development, or does that exist?
Yeah, no, the requirements for a new development to build sidewalks still exist. In fact, that was actually captured in, I think, the supporting documentation that went along with that, with the millage, in that this does not excuse a new development from building sidewalks adjacent to their property.
And so the fact that this particular condo development doesn't have sidewalks on its property is a relic of not having this requirement in the past?
I would suspect so, yeah. I don't know when this development, when the, that condo development actually occurred, but my guess it was many, many decades ago, and that I would presume that requirement didn't exist at the time.
But our standard now and in the recent past has been that sidewalks get installed by the developer.
Correct, yes.
Okay.
All right, thank you very much, Nick, for bringing this to us. I think it's a good refresher or new information for a lot of people, a lot of new stuff here for me too. All right, moving on then. Let's see, staff communication, staff report and updates. Raymond, I'm gonna review some highlights and
Sure thing. We are running a little late, so maybe Brett, with your permission, I'll run through them relatively quickly. It's hard to believe we were going to try to pretend to get through a resurfacing presentation tonight as well, so it's probably a good thing that got postponed.
Yeah.
So I will share screen like I have been doing as of late, just to show you all my notes that I review. So let me know. Hopefully is that sharing the right screen? The transportation project updates.
Yes.
Okay, good. Thank you. All right. Platte Road from Huron Parkway to Packard, construction is scheduled to begin in April, so keep an eye out for that. Similarly, Broadway Street from Plymouth to Plymouth will also begin in April. Earhart Road is anticipated to start this summer. That's what we've heard a lot about recently. This is from US 23 to Geddes Road. East Medical Center Drive Bridge. There was a substitute resolution, which was approved by council at their meeting on the 21st, which was after your meeting last time. And that directed staff to continue to work with the University of Michigan to, enhance the pedestrian and non-motorized infrastructure on the bridge. The redesign work is going to happen this year, and construction is tentatively expected to happen in 2024. Brook Street will complete sidewalks on both sides for the entire length of the project, speaking of sidewalk gaps, and construction is anticipated to begin this June. State and Hill improvements, final design changes do include a protected bike lane, the length of the project, and 10.5 travel lanes to facilitate bus operations. I will note, when I was kind of putting together my notes for this, or highlights, there was a section that was dropped, which says bidding through MDOT has been delayed, and at this time it's anticipated that construction may not begin until late May or early June. The project may end up getting split so that work on State Street is done in 2023 and work on Hill is done in 2024. More information to be provided when available. South Main Street water main and resurfacing. If you've been downtown, you've probably seen this. Construction has begun on phase 1, and Main Street is closed to vehicular traffic between William and Liberty. Current phase is expected to last through early May. Moving on to projects in design, Greenview from Stadium to Scioto Church. There is actually a public engagement meeting scheduled for tomorrow night. So if you're familiar with the area, feel free to go to that. I believe it's at the Pittsfield Branch Library over in Oak Valley, where that's going to be held. This is a resurfacing and water main project. And then as part of the discussion with the community, we'll be looking at ways to calm traffic and add an all ages and abilities bike facility. Miller Avenue from Chapin to Newport includes water main, stormwater, road resurfacing, crosswalk improvements, and an all ages bike facility. Design work just started, but the hope is that construction will happen next year in 2024. State Street and North U. This is kind of the extension of the project that you saw last year. So State Street from William to South U, and then North U from State to Fletcher. Work includes water main, stormwater, street resurfacing, sanitary sewer, work on Thayer, and then also bike lanes on North U, intersection improvements at State South U, and other crosswalk improvements will be part of the discussion. That project is also expected for next year in 2024. Pittsfield Village improvements includes several different things on Pittsfield Boulevard, Whitewood, and Pinecrest, such as water main, storm improvements, sanitary sewer, and road resurfacing. That project is expected to occur or be constructed in 2025. You got the update on the e-bikes, so I can go past that. MDOT, we're continuing to advance discussions with MDOT about the intersection of Jackson and Dexter / Ravenna, where the split is there. MDOT has agreed to a signal modernization, which will add a new crosswalk to the eastern leg of that intersection, so crossing Huron, and it will be an accessible pedestrian signal as well. That is expected to be constructed in 2024. And then there also is an intersection improvement project at Huron and 7th where traffic signal modernization will occur. That too will include accessible pedestrian signals, and it will include a northbound 7th Street left turn lane. Constructed is expected in fall of 2023. Streetlights, new streetlights were installed at Getty's Walnut and Getty's Linden and Traver and Tübingen. Traffic calming is kind of marching along. So Granger from States Packard had its second meeting in February. The other section of Granger from Forest to Olivia had its first meeting right after your last meeting on February 16th. And then Fulmer from Miller to Foss had its first meeting on the 23rd of February, and Baldwin had its first meeting. I think that was actually tonight. There's a typo here. That's the meeting that I think Cynthia was at before she joined us. So a lot of traffic calming petitions kind of moving through the process. As a reminder, we do have a consultant that's helping us with that. And then the next meeting of the traffic calming subcommittee will be next week on the 21st. A lot of things on the transportation implementation plan update. The Vision Zero subcommittee had their last meeting on the 27th, where they looked at some of the technical memos and annual snapshot. Their next meeting will be on April 24th. That's our subcommittee of the Transportation Commission, as a reminder. We did close the speed management program development for public comment at the end of February. We received 55 comments. We're actually thinking about doing another round of engagement using focus groups to make sure that we're kind of getting it right. So we're working with the Sam Schwartz team on what that might look like. I promised to talk about this in more detail, but in the matter of time, we might have to come back to this. But I mentioned the bike corral program that we're currently piloting. So we're currently researching bike racks that we can get and then deploy in the public right-of-way outside of downtown. And so, this is a call to all of you here. If you have suggestions for locations, let me know. This will be a relatively small pilot, a handful of locations that we'll deploy and then monitor, and then hopefully maybe scale it up as well. Or if you know of businesses or others in the public right-of-way or adjacent to the public right-of-way that would support such bike corrals, let us know. All right, education and encouragement, several things are going on. We're working with the Washtenaw Bike or Walk Bike Washtenaw on Bike Month activities in conjunction with Get Downtown. Kind of teeing that up. And then we launched a series of Vision Zero Lunch and Learn that were hosted by Cynthia Redinger and Suzanne Flowers from our team. The idea is to kind of start to institutionalize the Vision Zero plan across the entirety of the city among all departments. So we're encouraging participation among, all the departments that would have a part to play in that. So it's pretty exciting that we're, trying to not just do outward facing education, but inward facing stuff as well. And then on the outward-facing education side, we are going to host a League of American Bicyclists Cycling 101 course in May. It's a two-part series. It's roughly a 10-hour course. We're going to look to fill that. Spaces are limited, so if you know someone who might be interested, please have them get in touch with myself or Suzanne Flowers as we're starting to kind of put that into focus. Our team put in a strongest towns application. It just kind of acknowledges, the things that a community is doing for creating livable, safe, and inviting communities. If you're interested in voting in this competition for Ann Arbor or for one of the other communities, that round of voting opens next week. I think it's on the 20th. And they're doing it sort of like a March Madness bracket where, we are pitted against some other community, let's say in Illinois, and people get to vote which of the two communities should advance to the next round. So kind of a fun little thing. If you're interested, go to the Strong Towns website. You can find more information there. The Association of Pedestrian and Bicycle Professionals, Cynthia Redinger and Suzanne Flowers are co-chairs of that. And they're hosting a peer exchange with Missouri and Kansas chapter of APBP. So that's exciting. And then we have included some information on crashes. I think some of you are aware of this. There were 4 crashes that involved pedestrians this year. There was an incapacitating crash on the 24th at the intersection of Main and Kingsley, in which a pedestrian was struck by a vehicle. The signal was working properly. And as you all know, this is on the state trunk line. Additionally, and horrifically, there was a fatal crash involving a pedestrian at Huron and Parkview, in which a pedestrian was struck by a vehicle that was backing up. All infrastructure was working properly. This was a very kind of bizarre sort of crash, tragic, all the same, but it was a very unique situation. So it's hard to really discern what happened there. Like I said, both of those were on state trunk lines on Huron, and those have been shared with MDOT. There were also 2 non-incapacitating crashes or non-serious crashes. One was on the 6th of March at Catherine and Ingalls, whereby a vehicle failed to stop for a pedestrian in the crosswalk. And then there was another crash on March 18th at 7th and Snyder, where similarly a pedestrian was in the crosswalk and motorists failed to stop for them in that crosswalk. So those are, we're trying to, in response to recommendations from you and suggestions from you, kind of give you a little bit more real-time monitoring of these. And I want to thank, Mike Sherba and Andy Vayner and others from the police department who have been quick to notify us of these situations so that we can go out and assess if there are infrastructure things that should be done in those locations. So with that, I'm happy to entertain any questions that you may have, noting that we are over on time.
Right. Yeah, thank you, Raymond. As always, please feel free to email Raymond or the commission with questions. But yeah, seeing none anyway, in the interest of Peter, is that something kind of quick?
So, I do. It is quick. Scioto Church, I gather that there's a possibility that project could be delayed because of what happened at Liberty. We got that in a notice. Is that, when will that decision be made?
Decision is made. We will be starting work on the Scioto Church Road project on Monday. Our current understanding is that MDOT expects to have the highway reopened, hopefully Monday as well, after they've removed the damaged portions of the Liberty Bridge. Liberty will be reopened with 1 lane of traffic and a temporary signal on either side. That's not going to be great for our detour because that was supposed to be our detour for Scioto Church. So instead, we've changed our limits a little bit, or changed our phasing a little bit, so that when we start work on Monday, we will be leaving the Scioto Church and Maple intersection open. So that will remain open for some time in order to account for the fact that we won't be able to use Liberty as a detour as we had planned. Eventually, we will get to redoing what we need to do in that intersection, but I guess stay tuned for that. But that's the plan right now.
Thank you.
Okay.
Yep.
Thank you. Now liaison reports. Commissioners who serve as a liaison to another body or organization invited to provide brief reports and updates.
I can provide on behalf of the ride. Our ridership recovery for January is 77% of the pre-pandemic. We're also working to implement all of the millage approved services in 2024, so the night weekend and express route. And Friday is also Transit Employee Appreciation Day. So if anyone takes the bus, if you want to consider thanking your driver, so that's
Thank you. Thank you. Holly?
Yeah, the neighborhood traffic calming committee has been meeting, and we are getting close to having some recommendations to bring to the commission. So I think we're looking at our April meeting, having some stuff for the commission to consider in terms of next steps for neighborhood traffic calming.
Very much looking forward to that. Thank you. Any other liaison reports? Okay. Commissioner member communications. Any general commission and commissioner communications from anyone? All right, moving along, call for agenda items. Real quickly, some things to expect in the future. Maybe I'm stealing your thunder here, Raymond. Yeah, okay, we'll expect a budget presentation, the resurfacing program we know about, a topic on all ages and abilities bike network and the design thereof, presentation by Spin, and yeah, okay. Other topics requested, please email Raymond, myself, Megan, with any other agenda topic requests. Let's see. All right, so next meeting will be held on Wednesday, April 19th at 7 p.m. Again, it will be a virtual meeting like this one. Raymond, anything else before I start talking adjournment? Okay. Well, thank you very much. This has been a memorable meeting for me. Have a good night. If there are no objections, we'll adjourn our March 15th, 2023 meeting. No objections? All right, meeting adjourned. Thank you, everybody.
Thanks, everybody. Have a good night.